Welcome to the debate. We are constantly told that reading makes us smarter. But what if the sheer act of staring at a book for, exactly 30 minutes a day is actually giving us a false sense of intellectual accomplishment?
It is a genuinely provocative question. I mean, we live in an era where we are just completely obsessed with optimizing our time. We track our steps, we track our sleep, and now we are looking at a framework that tries to, engineer intellectual growth through a stopwatch.
Right, exactly. Today, we are diving into a deeply influential philosophy that prescribes a strict daily time quota for our minds. This premise suggests that carving out exactly half an hour a day to read acts as a catalyst for a complete revolution in our intellect and, frankly, our mental well-being.
Which is a massive claim.
Is whether this specific 30-minute metric is the true engine of cognitive transformation, or if it oversimplifies the messy reality of how human beings actually learn and process complex information.
And I think we are looking at this because time is, without a doubt, our most heavily contested resource right now. Between the push notifications and the infinite scroll, finding 30 unbroken minutes feels like a Herculean task.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge ask for most people.
It is, but my skepticism lies in the underlying assumption of this framework. I believe it fundamentally conflates the physical act of holding a book with genuine cognitive rigor. It basically ignores the deep complexities of how we process information, replacing nuanced intellectual development with, honestly, a rather simplistic time quota.
Well, what really caught my attention in this framework wasn't just the act of reading itself, but the compounding math behind the 30-minute rule. When you break it down, it is a highly effective structural tool. By dedicating just 30 minutes daily, a person accumulates 3.5 hours of deep focus per week.
Right.
And over a month, that is roughly 15 hours.
Which sounds like a lot when you put it that way.
It is a lot. That is the equivalent of attending an intensive university-level course. Over a year, it translates into consuming dozens of books across varied subjects. History, science, behavioral economics. The author's premise is that this steady accumulation forces our brains out of the passive consumption we are so used to.
Okay, but
It actively expands our vision from a narrow, specialized viewpoint to a multi-dimensional understanding of the world.
Sure, the math works out to 3.5 hours. But you're assuming all of those minutes are spent in deep, rigorous focus.
Well, you are focusing on a single task.
But sitting there with your eyes tracking words on a page does not magically guarantee that the brain is engaging in critical thinking. My fundamental issue is that this blueprint promises a massive revolution in intellect, yet simultaneously claims that reading virtually anything, even a light, predictable beach read, yields these massive cognitive benefits.
I don't think it's fair to say it claims a beach read makes you a genius.
It treats the sheer passage of 30 minutes as a magic bullet, entirely regardless of the rigor of the material. It implies that time spent equals wisdom gained, which is a massive psychological leap.
I see why you think it oversimplifies, but consider it like physical exercise. Think of your attention span right now like a muscle that has been stuck in a cast due to years of short-form video consumption. Our brains have been trained to expect variable rewards every 15 seconds. That 30-minute reading block isn't necessarily a heavy weightlifting session for everyone right out of the gate. It is physical therapy.
Physical therapy?
Yes, it is the painful, necessary act of forcing the attention muscle to bear weight again. When you read, you are delaying that dopamine hit. You're forcing your prefrontal cortex to hold information in your working memory, to understand a plot point on page 50 based on a subtle clue dropped on page 10.
But is it the same cognitive state? Because we have to look at the concept of processing fluency.
Okay.
The cognitive state required to untangle a complex historical treatise is fundamentally different from the cognitive state of reading a romance novel for escapism. A beach read has very high processing fluency.
Sure, it's easier to read.
Exactly. It relies on familiar tropes and predictable narrative structures. Your brain does not have to build new neural pathways or restructure its mental models to understand it. It is designed specifically to demand very little cognitive load so you can relax.
Right, but
You cannot claim that 30 minutes of high-fluency escapism provides the logical workout required to solve complex life problems. The framework assumes the medium of the printed page itself does the heavy lifting, completely ignoring that the content dictates the neurological rigor.
But I don't think anyone is claiming a romance novel teaches you corporate business strategy. The point is about structural defense.
Structural defense?
Yeah, it is about intentionally crowding out the bad habits. If you are physically holding a book and tracking a narrative for 30 minutes, you physically cannot be doom scrolling.
Well, unless you have your phone on your lap.
Assuming you put the phone away. Even with a lighter novel, you are still actively visualizing scenes, tracking character motivations, and sustaining a continuous thought process. Contrast that with a social media feed, where the context switch is constantly fracturing your attention. This habit repairs the damage by offering a reliable daily anchor of sustained focus.
But there is a glaring paradox here. If reading is this intense cognitive physical therapy you're describing, how can this framework simultaneously claim it is the ultimate stress reliever?
What do you mean?
Well, physical therapy hurts, it requires frustration and effort, yet this same blueprint promises that 30 minutes of reading will wash away the anxieties of the 21st century and bring you profound peace.
That brings us to one of the most fascinating empirical points in this whole discussion. The stress reduction isn't just a philosophical claim. It is grounded in actual mechanics.
You're talking about the Sussex data.
Exactly. The author points to a widely cited Sussex University study showing that merely 6 minutes of reading can reduce physiological stress levels by a staggering 68%.
Right.
The mechanism behind this is called cognitive displacement. When you read, your brain has to actively construct imagery and process narrative. This cognitive load demands so much processing power that it literally forces your amygdala, the brain's fear and anxiety center, to drop its focus on your daily stressors. It shuts down the rumination loop, expanding that scientifically proven 6-minute benefit into a 30-minute daily practice is profound.
I am highly familiar with that Sussex study, and it actually reinforces my skepticism about the rigid 30-minute quota. Let's look at the proportionality of what you just described.
Okay.
If the empirical data shows that it only takes 6 minutes to achieve a 68% reduction in physical and psychological stress, meaning the heart rate slows and muscle tension drops almost immediately, why is a strict 30-minute quota necessary to achieve the so-called peace?
Because 6 minutes only addresses the acute physiological symptoms.
Exactly. The bulk of the relaxation happens immediately. Stretching this to 30 minutes feels incredibly arbitrary. It isn't because 30 minutes is scientifically required for the amygdala to stand down. It is because 30 minutes sounds like a substantial, marketable behavioral narrative.
I think that's a bit cynical.
It is a nice, round number that looks good on a schedule. It tells the reader, give me half an hour and I will give you a purified soul. It is treating a complex psychological state, inner peace, as a transactional commodity that can be purchased with exactly 30 minutes of your time.
But I think you are missing the two-stage process that is happening here. Yes, the first 6 minutes might lower your acute heart rate and quiet the amygdala, but the remaining 24 minutes are what actually allow you to engage in that deep intellectual dialogue.
But those are two different things.
You have to clear the brush before you can plant the seeds. The philosophy here is that modern life leaves us chronically exhausted. By demanding a full 30 minutes, it ensures you don't just take a brief breather before jumping right back into your agonizing work emails. You fully transition out of the stress state and immerse yourself in another world.
See, you are trying to combine two biologically opposing states of arousal. A rigorous, mind-expanding intellectual workout, the kind that builds those complex mental models you mentioned earlier, requires high cognitive load, effort, and often a degree of frustration.
Right.
Meditation and stress reduction require a lowering of cognitive load. By jamming both of these profound promises into a single 30-minute bucket, you dilute the reality of what it actually takes to achieve either deep learning or deep relaxation.
I disagree. I think they are complementary. Overcoming the initial friction of focusing on a complex text requires effort. Absolutely. But once you break through that friction and enter a flow state, the psychological relief is immense. And this transitions perfectly into the behavioral reality of how we actually build our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at the concept of the discipline loop. This framework argues that by replacing 30 minutes of phone scrolling before bed, or by choosing to read for 30 minutes on your morning commute, you are building a lifestyle based on proactive choices rather than reactive algorithms. It is about proving to yourself that you can maintain a commitment regardless of your environment.
And this is where the theory completely collapses under the weight of lived human experience.
How so? The whole point of the discipline loop is to overcome less than ideal circumstances.
Because the premise fundamentally contradicts itself regarding the necessary conditions for intellectual growth. The author introduces this beautiful concept of dint tum, essentially stilling the mind.
Yes, a great concept.
It is. That profound state of single tasking where your internal chatter quiets down and you achieve deep, uninterrupted focus. The framework acknowledges that true engagement requires this quiet, concentrated state. Yet, in the very same breath, to prove how accessible this habit is, it suggests this deep intellectual revolution can be achieved in 30 minutes on a noisy, bumping commute bus.
It is arguing for pragmatism. Perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good.
But let's ground this in reality. We have all been there. You are on a crowded bus, the person next to you is talking loudly on their phone, the bus hits a pothole, your brain is engaging in what neurologists call sensory gating. It is burning precious glucose just trying to filter out the background noise so you can focus on the page.
True, it takes effort.
In that environment, you are not achieving ding-dum. You end up reading the same paragraph of a history book 4 times, your timer goes off, and you close the book. Have you really achieved cognitive growth, or did you just successfully kill time? It romanticizes the image of the disciplined intellectual on a bus rather than confronting the neurological reality of how fragile focus actually is.
Well, I think demanding pristine, sterile laboratory conditions for reading is exactly why so many people in the 21st century just give up entirely. They think they need 3 hours of perfectly silent, uninterrupted time in a mahogany library to even open a book.
I'm not saying you need a mahogany library.
But this blueprint is brilliantly dismantling that barrier. By suggesting the bus commute, it anchors the habit to an existing daily routine. Is reading on a bus less neurologically optimal than reading in a silent room? Of course it is. But 30 minutes of attempting to focus on a book on a chaotic bus is infinitely more valuable than 30 minutes of passively letting an algorithm feed you short videos on that exact same bus.
I won't argue with that.
Right? The discipline loop isn't about achieving perfect comprehension every single day. It is about the daily assertion of agency over your own attention.
I agree that asserting agency over our attention is the defining challenge of our time. But I question whether a rigid time quota is the healthiest way to cultivate that agency. When we prioritize the metric over the mission, when the goal becomes simply hitting 30 minutes rather than achieving deep understanding, we create perverse incentives.
What kind of perverse incentives?
People will subconsciously choose easier books just to get through their 30 minutes. They will clock watch. If the ultimate goal is to foster a true revolution in intellect, the focus should be on the depth of the inquiry. A better framework would suggest reading a single complex chapter until you fully understand it, whether that takes you 12 minutes or 2.5 hours. By anchoring everything to exactly 30 minutes, it turns the profoundly personal, deeply variable experience of learning into an assembly line metric.
I see your concern about it becoming a chore, but I view the 30 minutes not as a ceiling, but as a floor. It is the minimum viable dosage required to spark the discipline loop. The underlying philosophy clearly states that from this small initial investment, boundless benefits flow.
If you stick with it.
Exactly. It is the catalyst. Once that baseline of discipline is established, the reader naturally seeks out more complex material because their capacity for sustained focus has expanded. They naturally move from the light fiction to the dense history book. They transition from the noisy bus to intentionally carving out quiet time at home because they have actually experienced that stress reduction and that intellectual awakening. It offers a pragmatic, highly accessible entry point into a lifelong transformation.
An accessible entry point, yes. A guaranteed intellectual revolution, that is where the promise overplays its hand. It offers a beautiful, highly marketable illusion that we can simply hack our way to wisdom and inner peace with half an hour a day. But true wisdom requires friction. It requires wrestling with contradictory ideas, navigating confusion, and sitting with thoughts that simply do not fit neatly into a daily timer.
So, to pull these threads together and summarize our positions, we have thoroughly examined this framework and its claims about a daily 30-minute reading habit. From my perspective, this approach is a highly effective, deeply necessary tool for navigating modern life.
Right.
Supported by the compounding math of roughly 15 hours a month and the empirical reality of cognitive displacement lowering our stress, this daily investment acts as a vital countermeasure. It establishes a powerful discipline loop that physically and mentally forces us away from passive consumption, slowly rebuilding our attention spans and turning us into active, principled thinkers.
And to synthesize my perspective, while the act of reading is undeniably one of our most valuable tools, this specific framework overly romanticizes the 30-minute metric. It fails to reconcile its own internal contradictions. It struggles to explain how reading in highly compromised environments like a loud bus, or reading purely high-fluency escapist material, can simultaneously provide intense cognitive workouts and profound meditative peace. It basically attempts to package a deeply complex, highly variable cognitive process into a simple, predictable time-based transaction.
Yet, despite our substantive disagreements on the mechanics and the metrics, I think there is a profound point of convergence here. We both clearly agree on the underlying diagnosis of the problem this framework is trying to solve.
Oh, without question. The modern attention economy, driven by short-form video and the relentless pace of algorithmic feeds, is actively eroding human focus. Our capacity for sustained, deep thought is under threat. Taking deliberate, structural steps to defend our cognitive bandwidth is not just a self-help trend. It is crucial for our intellectual survival.
Exactly. And that is where the value of deeply interrogating ideas like this lies. It forces us to look closely at the invisible mechanisms running our own habits. We have to ask ourselves, is it the sheer quantity of time we dedicate to a task that changes us? Or is it the rigor, the content, and the environment of our engagement that drives true personal transformation? We encourage all of our listeners to explore the source material further and determine for themselves how they want to measure their own intellectual growth.
Because the human mind isn't just a ledger where you can deposit minutes and automatically withdraw wisdom.
Precisely. Which brings us right back to the core challenge. When we seek a cure for the modern ailments of distraction and chronic anxiety, we have to decide, are we just looking for the comfort of a clean 30-minute prescription, or are we willing to do the complex, messy work of actually healing our attention spans? Thank you for listening.